Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our latest educational forum put together by the mainline NAACP. The intent of these fora is for practitioners and educators who are doing the lion's share of work every day to improve the educational experiences of our students throughout the mainline and all the school districts within these districts, to have an opportunity to hear from their co-workers, pick up some pointers as far as best practices goes on issues and tasks that are front and center for all of us. Tonight's forum will address curriculum updates and reforms. Of course, curriculum updates is an ongoing task which will never end and should never end, because society and technology and body of knowledge in the world continuously changes. So schools accordingly update their approach to how they educate their students. But more specifically, the type of curriculum reform that we are currently addressing are the kind of work that updates the educational experience of students to include more effectively the contributions of people of color and all those who have traditionally been left out of the curriculum up to this point. We have a great group of people who have assisted with the session tonight. Our moderator, as before, is Dr. Anthony Stevenson, who, of course, needs no introduction, but very briefly, he has over 20 years of educational experience. Currently, he serves as the principal of Wayne Elementary School, and as if that wasn't enough, he's also a Lower Merion commissioner and serves in that capacity, as well as being the director at Radnor Township School District. So I've asked Anthony to moderate tonight's event. We also have special guests that, again, will lend their voices. Dr. Christopher Brown, who serves within the Abington schools and has tremendous experience, hands-on experience, equity and inclusion, as well as curriculum design, and is currently, of course, is the director of equity. And we have Dr. Azeb Kinder from the Kinder Group, who is also a very experienced educator and currently heads the Kinder Group, which deals with equity and inclusion and all the related topics with her practice. We've asked some students also to participate, and hopefully they will have a voice and express their take as far as the work that's being done currently. So without further ado, I'd like to ask Anthony to unmute himself and get us started. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Rich. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome and thank you for being here tonight. This is an important conversation, important work, and it's good to see people I haven't seen in a while. Kenny Vaughn is the man. You look like $1 million. It's good seeing you. Tonight, what we want to do is want to make sure that we have this conversation. We want to make sure that, we're time sensitive, so we're going to keep to the schedule as much as we can. We ask that our participating districts, TE and Lower Merion, we will have you come up because you're the featured conversations about curriculum. Thank you for being here tonight. And we're also going to have the opportunity for other folks who are other districts, if you are here, to give a summary update for yours as well. We will also make sure that we are a part of that conversation. This work around equity is hard work, but it's a necessary work, and that's why we're all here. And one of the people who I'm going to introduce, Dr. Christopher Brown, who's he's been in the forefront of the leadership of DEI work. Abington was one of the first districts that appointed a full-time DEI equity person. Chris has an extensive background, former high school principal from the Wallingford Swarthmore School District, a graduate of Villanova University, and now is in Abington. And if unselfish plug, he's also a member of the board in which I serve as the director of the Southeastern Pennsylvania Educators of Color Network at Villanova University. That's my public commercial where we support affinity groups for educators of color, and we're working to expand to working with districts where we not only working to recruit, retain, and support the diversity issues around those folks who want to work in suburban districts. So I invited Chris to do two roles tonight. Chris will give a summary from the lens of a DEI perspective, as a leader of DEI perspective, and then he will also help co-facilitate, particularly when we move on to the question section. Dr. Brown.
Thank you, Dr. Stevenson, for the introduction. It's good to be here tonight. You forgot the most important part of our connection, which is probably about, 10, 12 years ago, when I was coming into the administrative game. Dr. Stevenson passed me over for a job, probably one of the biggest regrets of his professional career. So I never let him live that part down. But I think things worked out all right. So thanks for the invitation to participate. And I was asked to kind of kick off tonight and just, share a little bit of my experience as an equity officer. And as Anthony mentioned, I was hired in November of 2019, which, in terms of, it feels like if you look at the calendar, it's a short time. It feels like an eternity in terms of kind of all of the changes in society that have occurred since that point. And one of the things, I think it's important to highlight, especially with our district, that has been a tremendous gift has been that, I don't have to fight to justify why we're doing what we're doing, and it feels very, very positive in the seat that I sit in to have, the full support of our board of school directors, our superintendent, our assistant superintendent, in terms of the work that we're trying to do. And it's a shared ownership, I think, which has been very critical. And in my work with other area schools who, have people in similar positions, one of the themes that comes up, as we connect is the fact that, there's well, I guess this is not uncommon in education right now, but a growing feeling of fatigue, in terms of being the only voice within a school system that is pushing for, equity, that is pushing for, the issues that we talk about. And I don't think that's the case in Abington, and I don't feel that. And I think that's very important. So as you're growing, and many of you, no matter what your role is, you all have a stake in terms of ownership in the work, whether you're a positional leader in the field or whether you are just a passionate leader in the field, meaning maybe you're a classroom teacher, but everybody owns a piece of the work. And I think that's important. And one of the things that guides us, within our district, and this was critical, I feel like a broken record every time I say it, because I think I do it often with our teachers, with our stakeholders, no matter the setting, like it all comes back to our core values as a district. And within those values, I can point to them. Diversity is a strength and an asset. Students deserve a safe and secure learning environment. There's certain things that within our core values that is our North Star in terms of why we're doing what we're doing. And that's unquestioned in our space. So when we have our conversations, when we talk about, the need to as Alex mentioned in the opener, when we talk about revising curriculum or adding books or materials into our programming, like that's a guiding principle. And, the good thing about this is it doesn't always come from me, and that it shouldn't always have to come from me. And I think that's a place where we've grown. That's a place where we continue to grow. And I don't share that to say like we've arrived at this place where, like we're a model for the educational sphere, because we still have work to do as well. But I think, in terms of guiding principles, that's a very solid foundation. So we keep coming back to that. And I'll also say, in terms of the challenges, because I mentioned, that piece of fatigue, and I know that the grounding principles are important. But one of the things that I think is equally important is tying. All of this is connected. All this is for the elevation of our students. And you've got to bring it back to that place. Because we as adults, like we visit school spaces, like we go, we check in, but the students live and breathe that experience every day. And we so very often utilize their feedback in terms of designing programs, in terms of, gathering feedback on their school experiences. And that helps as well. So I think those pieces for us have been very critical in terms of advancing our practices and being transparent about it. So in terms of what we're trying to do and how we're trying to make that happen. So I think those things in terms of kind of getting off the ground with our work were important, and also utilizing and incorporating in a meaningful way our stakeholders. I think one of the things that's important when you're sustaining momentum, because I'll use sustaining as the word here, because as events and major events happen, there's always energy. Like when the headline comes in the news, when an event happens at a school, there's going to be a tremendous amount of energy. We need this, we need this, we need this. But it's the sustaining the energy that's important. And one of the things that I found that's very important in terms of us and sustaining that energy is just people need to know that when they bring things to you, when they come to the conversation, that they have a meaningful stake in that. So they know that when they come in, when they share issues, like we're not just paying lip service to their issues. Like we listen, we hear, and we address that and we follow through. And I think those are important points because that's how you sustain it. Because if the energy is only there in reaction, then I think it becomes it's hollow. It becomes to a point where people lose faith because they just think, oh, here, like this, we can outlast this surge, and then it fades away, which has happened in some places. In terms of there was a significant spike in terms of energy surrounding DEI work post George Floyd that has tapered. But I think some of the challenge is how do you sustain? And I think for us, it's keeping those guiding principles and knowing that we're working to be in a place where we're not reactive. We're working to be in a place where we have our core beliefs, we have our foundation. And because of that, like this is why we do these things. And the example I'll give, and this will be my concluding point, the example I'll give that's important is February is Black History Month. And, we've got a lot of teachers and a lot of students will come up and say, well, what are we going to do for Black History Month? And this is a perfect example because in the place where I would like to be is where February is highlights. I'm using Black History Month because it's February right now, but there's a lot of other themes and celebrations that, our students will say, well, what are we going to do for this? And it shouldn't just be that. Like proactive means like we've got a system of philosophy, practices in place to where we're recognizing and acknowledging, you name it, all of the different contributions of all of the different cultures and things that make up our community consistently. That's an example of what I mean by proactive, where it doesn't have to wait until February. It doesn't have to wait until Women's History Month. So like those are some of the things, in terms of mindset shifts that we've been working on in terms of our effort to sustain. So that being said, I'm going to transition because I know we're on a time schedule and I'll be getting back into the conversation later. But I just wanted to share a little bit of my own experience as it relates to DEI work overall.
Thank you, Chris. I just want you to know that you were my top second place. I mean, so I was going to call you back, but I was. So what we want to do now is we have two districts who have agreed with the mainline NAACP to give updates on their curriculum work around this this area, and that is the Lower Merion School District and Tredyffrin Easttown School District. We're going to start with Lower Merion. They're also Alex Dude is this video clip. Is this from the mainline NAACP?
No, the video clip was prepared by a few Lower Merion students who asked me if they could share some of their thoughts in a short sort of composite clip tonight. Now, I must say, with my schedule and traveling, I have been able to actually see the video. Maybe Anthony has, so, you know, take it as you might. But it is prepared by students, a few students from Lower Merion.
All right.
Namely, mostly Harrington High.
Okay. So we want to show the video, and then we will transition to Lower Merion. Let me.
Awareness about racism within Harrington and on the main line, create a safe space for Black, Indigenous, and students of color, and push for social and educational reform within Harrington and the Lower Merion School District at large. For this forum, we have asked a few of our officers and members to share their experiences and opinions on the state of diversity, equity, and inclusion within the current curriculum at Harrington High School.
Hi, I'm Kayla Adorno, and I'm a junior at Harrington. At Harrington, once every cycle, we have an advisory, which is a homeroom type setting where we have activities to talk about our school community or real world problems. While these advisories can be used as good times to talk about these topics, not every classroom goes over or even looks at the topics that should be covered during this time. But in some cases, when these activities are discussed, students do not pay attention whether they're on their phone or they're talking with their peers and friends. A way I like to gain student participation is to have everyone say at least one thing to contribute to the conversation. I think that this would be very helpful to do across the board in different advisories. The lack of acknowledgement about these issues proves to be problematic due to there being no change or raising awareness in the community. This lack of acknowledgement shows that there is a disrespect and disregard to these topics. While some teachers may facilitate conversations and attention to students, others do not care to gain the students' attentions back for the topic at hand.
Hi, I'm Maeve Daly Gibson, and I'm a 9th grader at Harrington. While everyone has a responsibility to call out racism when it occurs, teachers have the most power. When teachers disregard racism in the classroom, they make room for further hate. It's imperative that teachers grasp how much influence they have. As a district, we should take further strides in teacher education. Teachers have a responsibility to make everyone feel safe and supported. Harrington still has a ways to go in that front.
Hello, my name is Ashika Vyas, and I'm a senior at Harrington High School. Over the course of the last 4 years, I've read many books and studied many historical events. But I can count on my fingers how many times I've encountered authors that look like me or read about historical events that involve people that look like me. In fact, the last time I even recall hearing a South Asian name in a history class was 2 years ago, while reading about the Mughal Empire in Global Studies 2. The last time I heard a South Asian name in an English class was 3 years ago, while reading The Interpreter of Maladies by Jhumpa Lahiri. Unfortunately, this is only one example of how racial and ethnic minorities have been largely absent from our school's curriculum. The inclusion of diverse topics, authors, and resources in our high school curriculum is essential, not only for minority students to feel represented, but also for white students who are largely disconnected from the world outside the white European and white American perspective. There is so much diversity in our world and our nation. There is so much diversity among our historians and our authors. And there are so many diverse perspectives to study and analyze. So why is it that we've only really talked about one? As a community, we can take steps to diversify our curriculum. So let's start with a novel from an author of color, or a new textbook that has more than just a few pages on historical figures of color. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Isabel Krosnitz. I am a senior at Harridan High School. Over the years, I have noticed that white students are very uncomfortable discussing race-related topics, and I think that more students need to be exposed to POC narratives so these topics feel less taboo, and POC students are not left to carry conversations about race on their own. I believe it is the school's responsibility to encourage students to work through discomfort and to be engaged in learning about race through changing curriculum in humanities classes and other classes to reflect a diverse society.
Hi, I'm Kiana Carter, a senior at Harridan High School. Today I want to bring to your attention the lack of diversity with our faculty. As an African American student at Harridan, I do appreciate the few African American aides throughout our building. However, the majority representation of color is within the disciplinary department. Think of the impact students of color would have with incorporating more teachers of color within the classrooms. Comfort while learning is very primitive, not to be misleading and allow the assumption that students of color are uncomfortable with the current faculty. However, learning from someone who you can relate to can open up many doors and promote more learning and participation and/or interaction between students of color and teachers. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to our presentation, and to the organizers, thank you for giving us this opportunity to provide student opinion on this critical issue of curriculum reform. For more information, please contact our officers at the emails listed below. Thank you.
Okay, I want to thank those students for expressing themselves and sharing that in this space. We're now transitioning. We want to welcome Lower Merion School District here. Dr. McGloin, I'll let you take the lead.
Sure, I appreciate it. So I think Leslie's going to do our open up our presentation, but I do want to thank our students for having a voice for sure. They are a big part of why we do what we do and the work that we've done. And it is a work in progress always, but we feel like we are hitting it from many different angles. Actually, I think somebody mentioned Kenny Vaughn, and he's here to talk about curriculum as well, because he's a part of it, as is our students and all of our staff. So if you go on to the next slide, you'll see that, Leslie, yeah, thank you. You'll see that it's not just me speaking or Dr. Gaudioso, who's our Director of Elementary Education, or even our Supervisor of Humanities. We have students that have an audio in there. We have a student with us as well. We have our content leads, and we have our Becton Scholars facilitator, because curriculum doesn't happen in a vacuum. It doesn't happen from the administrative level. It happens from both the student level, from the staff level. And so while we absolutely have room to grow, we're pretty proud of the work that we're doing and look forward to what the future is going to hold for us. So next slide. So our presentation, we timed ourselves to try to be 20 minutes because I know that we have a short period of time, so we did work on this, but we really do want to talk about our stance and our context that we use for curriculum, how we build our curriculum, what's our process and the methodology we use, what research and review do we look at, and then implementing the curriculum from an equity and an inclusion perspective. So how does that happen? How do we make sure that we have that lens at all times? Next slide. As a district, our context and our stance really comes from a few different places. And one of the things that we really pay attention to is our care committee, which has been in effect for a very long time in the school district. And that is a community committee that meets on a monthly basis. Out of that comes the Achievement Imperative Task Force, which has many different subcommittees, but they promote a lot of curriculum and professional development. For instance, we started STEM programs for our African American students. Curriculum has been written out of that. We have a professional development committee. And of course, the district last year did start an ad hoc committee of the school board, which has focused on both curriculum, instruction, and policy. We had a new equity policy that was approved this year, and we're working on our AR for it. We thought demographics was important because I think that there's a belief of what the demographics in Lower Merion is, but that has changed over time. So we're about 60% white in the district, and then our next highest population is Asian, followed by Hispanic and Latino students. And so we do have a diverse group of students that are in our school on a daily basis. And when we think of our stance and how we attack curriculum, we're really thinking about it as standalone. I think I heard one of the girls talk about our advisory lessons that we have, and we do have them K-12 in the district, and they are standalone experiences, which we will talk about a little bit. But we also have embedded experiences. So we're not looking to call out that we're teaching anti-racism, but we're looking to embed it and really shift the narrative of what's happening in the school district. Next slide. We build curriculum as an experience, and our equity, as I had said, and our inclusiveness is to really be embedded within the curriculum so that it's not overt, but it is actually just something that really changes the way that we think and our narrative. From a perspective of tools and protocols that we use in the district, we do look at the NYU curriculum materials, that tool that you could use to vet your curriculum. We don't use it as a checkbox, but instead we use it to help us really just evaluate the process and the curriculum that we're writing. We also really do lean on the social justice standards out of Learning for Justice, and you'll hear that as we go through our presentation. Next slide.
Sorry, I'm unmuting. So hi, I'm the Director of Elementary Education, and I'm going to share an elementary example of something that is a targeted experience, like one of those standalone experiences that is in place as a guaranteed experience for all students. And this does not mean we don't also consider and work to design the integrated curricular experiences, but this CP, or Cultural Proficiency for Kids example, illustrates both a model and a process that we use to support practice, but also that embeds teacher ownership and professional development into the work so that we're building capacity for the work through the process itself. So I just want to really recognize the work and how this evolved. This came from an original cultural proficiency team initiative in one of our buildings. Each of our buildings has cultural proficiency teams and goals, and they started these lessons way back. And I want to just give a shout out to Sean Bernadowitz and Lynn Partridge, who really took the leadership on that. And then that it kind of grew, and it ended up, I would call this a ground up movement. And as it grew, we ended up with buildings that were trying to also pilot those lessons. So what we did is we developed a district CP team that has been working to take that work to scale and go beyond just grade level lessons and really look at thoughtfully aligning with the continuum of social justice standards. So the district team is made up of representatives from the buildings, and they start work with the social justice standards, setting goals, creating a template and lessons and a vision for the work. And then the teacher groups, including support from the administrative team, draft the lessons and use the NYU scorecard to help evaluate as needed, because we really want these to be exemplar lessons. Next click. So our third step, after we do this development and this review, we have the CP leaders who are on this district team. They go back and they are actually engaged in their own buildings as leaders, helping on PLC teams, grade level teams, to support teachers with review of the lessons, professional development, entertaining and working through questions that may come up by students. And that work is successful because of that intersection between the district and building teams. So these building teams charged with implementing the lessons also really work as a communication loop with the district team, and we engage together. We communicate out to families as well, because we're really looking at ourselves as a broad learning community. So we share before the lesson the learning targets with families, and we implement the lessons on the same day across the district with the intention of really engaging as an entire school and beyond community, a learning community around discussion of the topics and themes that are covered during these lessons. And finally, this feedback cycle continues with feedback from the teachers about how the lesson went. And it really keeps us in a loop of continuous improvement, focused on collaboration and teacher ownership so that they are really part of the process in making this work. Next slide. So here, this is just an example. When I mentioned we use a lesson template, we created this. And what I would say is one of the most important things about our process was that the teachers were involved in the creation. This wasn't something handed to them. This wasn't something from somewhere else that we found. This was something where we took the district goals, we took the social justice standards, we took some enduring understandings, we attached to the Pennsylvania Common Core standards, and we really looked at the continuum and the social justice standards that moved from identity, diversity, justice into action. The type of action where we have students who are civic leaders, and engaging in, like today, a public discussion and really looking at justice in action. So this is just a picture, and here's just a close-up of the type of developmentally appropriate learning targets that are throughout the social justice standards. And what we like about these is they're really concrete, they're student-friendly terms, they help the teachers and the students know what the outcomes are. We share these with parents, and they really are developmentally appropriate. And I think that's also really accounted for our success with these lessons, because they really are thoughtfully designed, both to be developmentally appropriate and also to help lead students through a continuum of skills and awareness and understanding. Next slide. So this is an example of these lessons. This is an example of how we anchor the lesson. So we're focusing on the social justice standards. The focus is cultural proficiency as students move through the lessons. And the picture books here anchor the lesson. And what's valuable about that is that we really can match to the age group that we're working with. You can see here how some of the teachers have appreciated the level of support and scaffolding with the really tight lesson design. Next slide. And here, in addition to collecting teacher survey information about the design, we include, as part of the feedback loop, consideration of whether teachers feel like the lesson achieved the learning target. And you can certainly see differences in what students take away, which is why the work is ongoing with focus across the grades on the messages of inclusion and respect. And the feedback cycle helps us to continually refine based on teacher and student experiences. Next slide.
And so building on this idea of the work in the district as recursive and dialogic and open to ongoing communication and reflection, we did just want to make transparent the larger methodology that we bring to the work. And so methodology isn't a set of steps, it's not a set of things that we do, but this is the worldview that is informing the conversations that we are attempting to engage in the district, both the conversations that we're having as well as the ways that we try to listen so that we can attune to and everyday work better to meet needs that people feel might not be met. So we think through this lens of critical pedagogy, and to think about how are we interrupting the practice of students just receiving, memorizing, or repeating information. We think through the lens of cultural responsivity. And so what does it mean that students co-construct their knowledge? We think through the lens of what does it mean to be explicitly anti-racist? So what does it mean to both recognize as well as transform systems and structures that are either overtly or inadvertently oppressive or exclusionary, any spaces that prevent people from feeling welcome and a part of their own learning. So that high-level overview is made more complex when we think about how that way of thinking gets enacted in our classrooms and how it gets enacted when we're trying to build curriculum. And so I'm using the term mutually constitutive because we have so many different ways that we're pulling or attempting to pull lots of voices into the conversation. So some of the curriculum work that we do is embedded and guaranteed. So there are ways that we're trying to revise our courses where we want to ensure that every student has a guaranteed experience. And then we also offer affinity experiences and then every gradient in between. We have curricular work that is organic and ground up, and that's going to be the first example we're going to share, and then share some additional student voices from students who are a little bit younger in their Lower Merion School District experience, because the kind of feedback that we are receiving from some of our upperclassmen has informed the work that is current and ongoing with our students that are currently in elementary and middle school. So we have work that is organic and ground up, and then we also have work that's structurally supported and every gradient in between. We also have work that is theoretical and research-based. And we just shared some of the methodologies, and then it's also applied and practical. So even in this presentation, we have students who have expressed a need specifically around inclusivity, around South Asian identities and literature and representation. So the work pulls from both of those spheres. And this first example, I think, highlights how curriculum work in our district, how we try to carve out the spaces to move between and among those different ways of being and thinking and doing to try to offer a sense of multivocality. So what you see here is a timeline from a previous board presentation we had done in Lower Merion with a timeline for Stamped, which is now a part of the 8th grade social studies curriculum. So every student in the Lower Merion School District experiences a minimum guaranteed of 4 lessons that focus on the text Stamped. What's most interesting about this, though, is that this work did not begin as a curricular initiative. In fact, it began in a book group where we had a group of educators and students, so a group of educators that were aligned to a building-based critical pedagogy team that was a grassroots teacher-led support network that in the wake of the George Floyd murder said, as a community, we need a way to come together. And so groups of students read the book in the spring, and then more students wanted to read the book, and a book reading happened over the summer, and teachers listened to students, and then administrators listened to students and teachers. And through those interactions, we had a very thoughtful change in curriculum when we took the time to try to be brave enough to listen. And to echo some of the sentiments that Dr. Brown had shared in the beginning of the presentation, and then also hearing the student presentation from the Breath group at Harriton, this idea of how one of the challenges and joys of this work is finding the space to be brave enough to listen. Right now, we have some students who participated in the book group for Stamped when they were 6th graders. So these were students who participated in that kind of ground up. We need a way to talk about race and identity. We want to talk to our students. We want to talk to our peers. How can the school help us do that? We have 2 students who would have been here tonight if it weren't the first night of what would be a very long weekend. So these students had agreed to kind of a quick interview, and I just wanted to share their thoughts on in relation to 2 questions. So one, could they share something about their experience of reading Stamped? And 2, now that Stamped is a part of the social studies curriculum, what are your thoughts? So, and these clips are very short. One is, they're very short.
Yeah, I'm really glad Mr. Butler decided to do the entire lesson then, because if that wasn't if there was an option to do only bits of it, it was really nice to have that entire discussion for pretty much the entire school year up to this point. So the book was woven through your curriculum from September until now on your team? Okay.
Was really a really well way to get that lesson across without just hearing one teacher's voice talk about it, kind of hearing an author's voice talk about it. And especially since you have a Black teacher, but I don't. So it was really interesting to hear it from someone in this community, which I thought was really important.
And what was the subject matter of that lesson again? The specific part of stamps?
It was the chapters leading up to the Civil War, which was around our topic that we were discussing in history during that time.
And then one final. And I'm going to stop this one about 58 seconds in.
I was really glad that they made it a part of the curriculum because I hadn't heard about this book prior to reading it. And after reading it, I thought it was just such like an eye-opening kind of experience. And because we, in the curriculum for the social studies curriculum for LMSD, we usually learn a lot about like early American history, like American Revolution, like Pennsylvanian history. But it was really nice to hear about a part of our history that isn't often talked about until 8th grade. So back in 6th grade, it felt really cool to like learn about something that we hadn't talked about, because I had not heard about like half of the names in these books. Like I had heard of Abraham Lincoln, but a lot of these like people had kind of like been lost, at least to, like the general history and what is talked about. Yeah.
And so what we can see in these examples is by asking our students about their experiences and the kinds of things that they need, we're in an ongoing effort to try to be recursive as well as responsive. So in addition to opportunities for this ground up work, we also have work that begins at a systems level. And so Mr. Kenny Vaughn is going to share some information about our middle school social studies curriculum and some of the anti-racist curriculum building work.
Definitely, thank you. So one of the first places we started when we looked at the curriculum was the 4 standards that you see there that we adapted from Learning for Justice. We thought it was really important to have a basis for discussion as we went through the curriculum. So whether it was the content or current events or contemporary events, these are things that we could always come back to. We want kids to think about equity issues. We want them to think about their place in dealing with issues of equity and injustice, and the fact that they can take action. So that was very important. So that was the first step. The next step was just us taking a really close look at our curriculum. That's always, we're always developing, as many people have said prior to me. It's always obviously an ongoing thing. So while we're proud of what we've done, we know we have a lot more work to do. But one of the things that we looked at was kind of glaring for us is when students enter 7th grade and they take history, the first time they're exposed to a story about a person of African descent is when it's associated with slavery. And we thought it was really important to take a step back and kind of widen our curriculum and go back to West African civilization so they could learn about, communities that were thriving prior to colonization. Communities where education was important. There was organized religion, a focus on building economies. And so to us, that was really important, especially for our students of color to see those positive images. The same is true of Native Americans prior to colonization. So we talked about different, Native American culture areas and how they value the land and the traditions and customs that they had. And so our whole goal in doing all that is also for the kids to see how devastating the impact of colonization was on these groups of people. So those are some of the things that we did with the curriculum, as well as just kind of embedding discussion about, as I said before, current events, contemporary events, and trying to teach, with a question mark, having students consider multiple perspectives when we look at events, and not just, a traditional European perspective.
Sorry, my cursor is stuck. And so this opens up a space for one of our students to share some information. As we think about these systematic courses, then we also have some affinity-based courses. So courses where students have a choice. And so I believe we have Kendall Law on.
Sure. So I can talk about my experience taking Voices in African American Literature, or VAL for short, last year. So when I first took it, I was a bit hesitant, since as a Black student in a predominantly white school like the one I attend, there's not many spaces where I can explore and learn about my culture and identity. But VAL allowed for me to do just that, whether it was from the literature we read, such as articles from the 1619 Project and the New Jim Crow, pieces of literature that were written by us that allowed for us to express our honest experiences with systemic racism, or having student-led discussions that allowed for us to talk in depth about the Black experience in America and how it translates into literature. And so with all that being said, I genuinely appreciated the opportunity I had to just take this class and learn about myself as a Black woman, and how my people have cultivated a culture that I both celebrate and strive to contribute to.
Hi, everyone. I'm Taj Bird. I'm the Beckton Scholars Advisor this year. The Beckton Scholars Program is a racial affinity program named after LMSD alumnus General Julius Beckton Jr. The program's been around for a while, for over 20 years. It was originally created as a safe space to address our disproportionate number of Black and Latinx students taking higher level courses. So the program was created to help students, our racially marginalized students, to enroll in these courses and excel. Over time, to address the diverse and ever-changing needs of the student population, the program, like all of our educational endeavors, has continued to evolve. In addition to enrichment, access, advocacy, Beckton currently serves as a brave space for culture, race, identity, and intersectionality. So these discussions are something that are happening every day. It's really dynamic. Our students are learning about themselves and society. The ultimate goal of this program, the combination of all of those things, is to ensure that this group of students receive the tools necessary to reach their full potential. An additional affinity course experience in our district is the Black Excellence Elective. Next up is my colleague, Chad Henneberry, to tell you more about that.
Hi, good evening. I'm Chad Henneberry, and I'm the Social Studies Department Chair at Lower Merion. And I want to tell you about Black Excellence, which we began discussing over the summer of 2020. And just like Dr. Brown was saying about utilizing and incorporating stakeholders, this wasn't just driven by a few Lower Merion teachers, but we consulted with student groups and teachers of color within the school and community members, and just kind of really got a sense of what were they looking for in a course where we could go a lot deeper into the experience of African Americans in America than we had seen before in our traditional US history courses or global studies courses. So really, what the course aims for is to provide an opportunity for students to embark on a deeper examination of individuals, groups, and movements which brought about outcomes of Black excellence in American society. So the course is structured as a semester elective. There are three major themes: Black excellence in politics, Black excellence in culture, and Black excellence in business/enterprise, in which we look at both kind of the people who developed amazing businesses in America, but also business groups and support groups throughout time. A lot of the course is driven by student interest. So this slide shows the student inquiry project that was around cultural explorations, and students, selected an area of Black culture that they wanted to delve more deeply into, everything from, the origins of hip hop to colorism in the beauty industry to Black nationalism, Black comedy. Some students made documentaries, some made websites, some made podcasts. One student, Deja, she made a cookbook of soul food from recipes that she had developed. So that was a good way that they can kind of delve deep into culture, but also share out and have a fun time with it. So one thing I want to show you is towards the end of the semester, the last unit was on legacies. And the idea with the legacies unit is that students aim to celebrate, educate, and inspire their peers and community through independent academic and creative work in diverse media. And that, basically it's going to provide an opportunity for them to show their understanding of the achievement of Black Americans in overcoming barriers, achieving political objectives, building businesses, further education, making academic and scientific discoveries, and influencing countless elements of culture in America. So, we discussed how are we going to do that? And the idea was to build a timeline. And so we developed a timeline that was going to be in a common area of the school, ACE's atrium. It's sort of a place where all the students hang out during the school day. And there was these blank walls that really had not been decorated. So students began to do several different things. One, they each found 9 different areas that they wanted to go further into. Could have been something that they studied earlier in the semester, but it could be a new topic or a new artist or a new politician that they hadn't studied before. Students also read a piece of Black literature, and they wrote a book review in order to spread the word that there's great Black literature in our library and it's accessible to all. So that was part of the timeline. Next slide, please. This is our senior, Sammy Garrison, and she read Ta-Nehisi's Coates' Between the World and Me, and she wrote a great review of it. Next slide, please. Okay, there we are. So, basically they decided how they wanted to organize the timeline. They created these different eras that they thought made sense, and they selected figures that represented business excellence, culture. So everything from Kendrick Lamar to Jesse Owens, will appear, to Lizzo will show up on this timeline. So it's just generally a way for the students to kind of show their peers what they looked at. This is in the last issue of the Merion, which is our student newspaper. One of the students that took it in the fall, Suleiman, he wrote a little article, an opinion piece about Black History Month, but he also called out the course, and he said, basically, courses like these are extremely important for both white students and students of color. Not only is it essential for all students to learn about Black achievements in history, but it is also crucial for Black people and students to learn about their history and heritage. While Black History Month is important, it's just as important that we teach Black history all year long. In the first semester of the school year, I took the course Black Excellence, the politics, economics, and culture of the American people. And in that short period of time, I learned more about Black history topics than ever before. The class was really important to me because I got to learn about Black figures like Malcolm X and Langston Hughes, as well as topics and time periods such as poetry in the Harlem Renaissance. So it was clear that this course was impactful for Suleiman and the other students. And I think it's really growing in popularity, and I'm glad it's been a success. So I'm going to turn over to Dr. McGloin, who's going to conclude our presentation.
So we do appreciate, I'm glad to hear somebody enjoyed the class. We really do appreciate you allowing us to speak today. I think we are working really hard to make sure that we're addressing diversity in many aspects of our curriculum and from many fronts. And so we look forward to keeping growing and keeping keeping our district moving forward with this area. So I think the next group probably, hopefully won't take as much time as us, but we do appreciate you letting us speak tonight.
Thank you. How we're going to do this is we want to make sure that we have the opportunity for folks to hear both. And I know T prepared, and then we're going to circle back in which Chris Brown is going to facilitate the questions from the chat and otherwise. I'm not sure who's leading TEs, but T folks ready?
Yeah, yes, we are.
Great.
I'm going to wait 1 second for our presentation for Horace to pull it up for us. But in the meantime, I'll introduce myself. My name is Wendy Toll. I'm the Director of Curriculum Instruction, Staff Development, and Planning in TE. And joining me tonight are 3 of my colleagues. Matt Strenzak, who is one of our assistant principals at Conestoga High School, and he is also our social studies supervisor. Horace Rooney, who's going to be our slideshow manager tonight. He is our English Language Arts and Staff Development Supervisor. And then Katie Walter, who is one of our social studies teachers and department chairperson at Conestoga. So we too thank you for this opportunity tonight to come and share with you some of the work that we're doing. Although we don't have any students with us tonight, when Katie shares her experience redesigning a specific course, she's going to share some of the direct feedback that we have received from students. Before we jump into the specifics of the presentation, I did just want to say that although certainly curriculum review and design has been something that, you know, has been going on virtually forever in our district, as in most districts, the focus on the redesign and the review of curriculum using the lens of equity is really something that has become much more intentional in our district within the past several years. And so with that in mind, I think we can say that, you know, we've made some really great strides so far, but we definitely know that there is a lot of growth that we can still move towards, and we're doing that together with our students and our families and our staff. So Horace, if you'll go to the next slide. So like Lower Merion, we have also implemented some standalone experiences focused on equity and anti-racism, particularly at the elementary and middle school levels through our morning meetings and our hero lessons. But tonight, what we're going to really focus on is the specific curricular frameworks and how we are approaching them. So as we begin the discussion of our curriculum review and revision, I really want to emphasize, as I mentioned, well, a few things. First of all, as I did just mention, the process has been and continues to be ongoing. We spend time every year reviewing our curriculum and making changes. But the second important thing about our process, and that is important to understand, is that for many years, we have sought to develop and implement a curriculum that encourages critical thinking and includes multiple perspectives. I think the difference in the last few years is that we've also been very intentionally using this lens of equity and asking ourselves and our students and families what voices are missing from the narratives that we're sharing in our classrooms, and how do we go about amplifying those voices and including them in a valuable way in our discussions. So what you see on this slide are some of the drivers that have moved us towards this equity-focused review process. We've been doing some specific equity work with our staff, our faculty and staff, as well as with our students. And some of those new understandings that we have developed resulting from that work have been one of the drivers. Certainly our parent and student voices are always drivers as we look at the curriculum and our instructional practice. And then the teacher's desire really for frameworks and resources that support this curriculum that represents the diversity of perspectives found in the real world. Next slide, please, Horace. This quote, I think, is something that, you know, as a district, we have tried to embrace as we do all of our curricular work and continue our equity work. And I think that, you know, this is one of our goals when we're thinking about the curriculum. How can we provide an opportunity for our students to explore the completeness of the content of the experience of those historical perspectives that we are sharing with them in the classroom. Next slide, please, Horace. So when we think about curriculum, really sort of three things are areas of focus for us. First of all, our framework, our curricular framework. And that framework is developed by our teachers in concert with our supervisors, certainly standards aligned, and also very specific to the goals, the interests, and the community that we work with. The next piece is the resources, you know, so how do we bring the framework to life? And one of the things that has become important to us as we are thinking about the resources that we're bringing into the classroom is how do those resources fully show multiple perspectives? And not only that, but are the resources accurately portraying those multiple perspectives? There are some questions that we have really started to ask of the folks that we work with, the publishers, the providers of these different resources, and really critically analyzing all of the texts and the materials that we're using to work with our curricular frameworks. And then a really critical piece of the curriculum is how are we going to implement the curriculum? How do we support students in exploring multiple perspectives and critically analyzing those perspectives that are different than their own? And you know, through our instructional practice, are we considering what we're doing through the lens of race, gender identity, religious belief, or maybe even, you know, the various abilities and disabilities that students may have or may encounter? So we've had a lot of focus in our curricular development on sort of a parallel focus, I guess, on really working on instructional practices and what are the most effective practices as we're approaching the curriculum with this new lens of equity. Next slide, please. That said, so we felt as though we needed to develop our own consciousness and understanding as we were approaching some of this curricular review. And one of the ways that we did that was to develop several different strategic partnerships that would be able to provide personal and professional development. So this slide just gives you a few of the organizations that we've worked with. Similar to Lower Merion, we've worked with Lower Learning for Justice. We've done some work with Facing History on Ourselves. We've worked with CARE, and then Courageous Conversation, Pacific Educational Group has really been a foundational partner for us. Being able to provide the Courageous Conversation to our faculty and staff has really been important so that we can develop a common language, some common understandings, and really work on our own personal and collective racial consciousness as we continue to do this work. And then, of course, we look to the expertise that comes from the lived experiences that are different than our own. Members of our community, our students. We have some universities in the area that we've partnered with too, to really, on a regular basis, bring those voices into the conversation and help us to consider, you know, what areas do we need to continue to enhance, what things are missing. So the next piece of our presentation is now going to look at, that was sort of a broad overview. And now I'm going to ask Horace and Matt to really talk about, when we get down to the specific areas, the different curricular areas, what are some of the things we've done and what has that process been like? So I'm going to hand it off to Horace and Matt right now.
Thanks, Dr. Toll. So I'll begin with just giving you all some more in-depth information as to the approach we've taken. And so one of the things that we really strived to do was to begin building momentum from within the district. And so the way we initially began to go about that was to really connect English language arts teachers with social studies teachers. Although, of course, we want equity to be reflected in science and math and art, you know, every facet of our kids' learning experience. We want, you know, this DEI work to be embedded. But, you know, as a starting point, we felt that we could get the biggest traction, at least by starting with really revising and revitalizing, you know, what we're presenting to students in terms of English language arts and social studies. So what are the materials we're using? You know, who are the authors who are creating these materials? What do our social studies textbooks look like? What kind of novels are the kids reading? But even beyond that, looking into, you know, are teachers willing to delve into topics such as the George Floyd murder? You know, when they come into school the next day after, you know, not only that event, but, you know, after, the consequences for the people who committed the crime, right? You know, are teachers willing and comfortable to give students spaces and openings to be able to reflect and just share their thoughts and perspectives? Are the classroom environments such that, you know, students would feel comfortable being able to really open up to their concerns and their reflections? And it's an ongoing process. But that said, what we began to do was get the English language arts and social studies teachers together first to look through data. So, you know, looking at our district and looking at different aspects and facets of our district, such as disciplinary practices. You know, our district, you know, had some statistics that we weren't, you know, either we weren't aware of, or, you know, once we became aware of them, we're like really getting a sense of, you know, what are the next steps? So if there's 3%, you know, or 4% students that are Black in the district, should they be the second, you know, highest in terms of out of school suspensions? The answer is no. But those were some of the startling statistics that our district was staring at and facing. And not just disciplinary statistics, you know, how are our young kids of color represented in terms of honors courses, advanced courses, and the like. So we had to take a really hard look at the data and just see what it is that our district is practicing. And then from there, begin to take action steps to do something about it. So looking at the curriculum, you know, as you know, some of the other previous presenters mentioned, you know, are traditionally marginalized voices, you know, heard? Are there, you know, Black authors? Are there Asian authors? Can LGBTQ plus, you know, kids see some reflection of themselves within the work? You know, so you know, what are we currently teaching the students? What materials are we using? So that said, similar to Lower Merion, we did really look at learning for justice and, you know, the social justice standards as at least the beginning point and the foundation of what we wanted to see happen. But then also really thinking about, can we replace some of the units that we've been teaching just because they represent the quote unquote classics? You know, who are these classes written by? And, you know, are they still representing of what kids need to see across the board. We also really developed some explicit instruction in terms of civil discourse. How can teachers create the classroom environments needed to be able to have civil discourse? But then also, what are the terms and what are the definition of certain terms, such as equity, right? Such as equality, such as bias, and different terms that we really wanted to get the English language arts and social studies teachers together to discuss. Are we on the same page? So first, let's reflect on what we believe about these statements, and then let's get some shared common language as to what we will say these statements means, and how, and is it universal across those courses, those English and language arts courses. So really coming up with that shared terminology, that shared verbiage, so that we're all on the same page. And then even to the point of planning out opening activities in the school year to begin to engender those classroom environments that will allow for these conversations. So what I will say is that work, is still moving forward, right? To be quite transparent, every teacher is in a different place in terms of their journey. You have some teachers that are extremely passionate and confident about being able to, establish these kinds of environments within their classrooms. And then there are some that, are not as confident. They might be passionate, but they're not as confident. And so they might be a little bit more hesitant to begin having these conversations. And then there are some that are not as passionate. I mean, if we're going to be completely unvarnished, there are some that are not, but are we giving them the training and the space to hopefully continue their journey and then be able to open their classrooms up to take the journey with them? Matt, I don't know if you wanted to, build on anything with this slide before I move on to the next one.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Horace. I think a big part of what you mentioned was talking about classroom environments, talking about us putting an emphasis on classroom community and building relationships, right? And I think something I also heard from Lower Merion was this idea of proactive approaches to equity instruction rather than reactive. And I think a moment that helped our staff really move forward and kind of assess where they really were with their preparedness was, following the murder of George Floyd. Some teachers were ready. They built classroom communities. They could have conversations with their students. Their students felt that they were safe. Their students felt that they were seen. Other teachers, and they were coming to me, were like, I'm not sure what to do. And that was a moment where, okay, we have work to do. We have teachers that are demonstrating now more than ever a willingness to learn. It shouldn't take that, but I feel like that allowed teachers to really reflect on where are we? And that really is really where we start to look at relationships. And also just the idea of discourse, right? Facing history on ourselves was a tremendous resource. We had them come to one of our department meetings, and they really have a great framework for how to have the conversation, how to develop classroom contracts, how for teachers, for them to look into themselves and challenge their own biases, right? Challenge the way that they approach a conversation, how they perceive the events around them. So really looking at that personal, immediate, and local piece that they bring into a conversation. So that was excellent. I think another big part of it, and Horace, you mentioned it, was just this idea of professional development. To be able to have conversations around equity, to be able to dive into these issues, teachers have to understand the teaching strategies that they have to implement to be able to have in-depth discussion, to be able to do in-depth analysis. And so I think what it's allowed us to do is to really focus on the why. And so, Horace and I, we always kind of laugh at this, like there's those certain books or there's certain activities that teachers hold on to, and it's kind of like, well, what's the why, and how does this allow all students to be seen, and how does this advance what we're trying to do for our kids? And so a lot of that work is diving into the teaching strategies, and that's on us as educational leaders, as instructional leaders, to be able to provide that. And then one piece that I kind of like to talk through with teachers is, and we're starting an elementary curricular review soon, is this idea of kind of when I talk to teachers, I say, okay, when we look at our curriculum, we want to think about, are there things that we need to renew? Things that, we know are good practices that we just need to be more intentional about? Are there areas of our curriculum where we need to rewrite, where, we need to pull things out and we need to rewrite? Are there things that are already in our curriculums that we need to reframe So rewrite, renew, reframe, rewrite, or in some cases, are there things that we need to abolish? Are there teaching strategies, activities, and things that we need to move beyond? And part of that is just embracing that growth mindset and understanding the importance of what we're doing in our positions. So we're really excited about the work. It's ongoing. It has its challenges, it has its rewards, but we center on kids, we center on community, and we keep going forward.
Thanks, Matt. So some of the results, as I'd spoken to before, we were able to create some shared common language in terms related to DEI. We were able to create a repository of activities and pedagogy for creating a culture of inquiry. So basically saying like, okay, taking it out of the theory, right? Theory is important and, it's a necessity, but at the end of the day, how am I supposed to actually create this environment? So what are some of the activities? What are some of the things that we can do in the beginning of the year to help, to build relationship with the students and to help students build relationships with one another? And so creating a resource where teachers can access those activities, given the types of environments they were trying to create. So what are some actual concrete activities that we can do and practice with the students on a regular basis where it becomes second nature to be able to tackle these kinds of questions, where if there's an extremely important or nationwide, event that takes place, where it is not going to be a question among the students' minds as to whether an opening will be made for reflection. It won't just be glossed over. It won't just be ignored. The teachers will be able to take the temperature of the class and get a sense for how much time needs to be spent on a given topic. To Matt's point, new curricular units. What are some things we just don't need to do anymore? What are some books, that we can stand to take out of the novel units and replace with other ones? And so being able to give teachers the space and time to be able to do that. So, whether it's providing them with time for professional developments during the school year or providing them with time over the summer. But, recruiting and asking them to, take time to create new units with the social justice standards in mind. One example is of work that actually took place among the 8th grade teachers this year. They worked together to create a reformers unit where the social studies teachers will be talking about reformers in their nonfiction, informational text, and concurrently the English teachers will be reading books associated with those reformers so that they're getting it in English and social studies. And being able to really get a deep sense for the factual aspect and also, the emotional, the spiritual aspect of the work that each reformer did. And then really getting a sense of the increased focus on, voices that you don't hear. I heard many of the Lower Merion students talking about, hey, 3 years ago, we read a book of someone that, looks like me or could relate to me, right? And looking at our own district and seeing, okay, is that the same experience our kids are getting? And so one way we strive to do that was at the high school. There was an initiative called One Book, One Stoga for Conestoga High School. And they read a book called Patron Saints of Nothing. And every single student, 9 through 12, got a chance to read this book. And it had an author that is not a traditional author, Filipino, main character. And they got a chance to, read from a different topic. They're not accustomed to reading. And so really trying to make sure that each one of the students, regardless of their ethnic background or race, got a chance to hear from a different voice than they normally don't hear from. Matt, did you want to speak to any of the bullet points in this slide at all?
I think what's been great is just collaborating between English and social studies is that shared common language. One of the things that we did when we looked at the high school was that we had social studies English teachers take really the first piece of the school year. And we kind of said, hey, more or less than 10 days, and use that time to define common language, common terms, things that we're going to see in both classes, so that students saw that it wasn't just isolated to one classroom or one teacher or one content area, but it was really a cultural shift with our instruction and what we were doing. And that's allowed for increased collaboration, that's allowed for teachers to step out of their comfort zone with some of the pedagogical strategies that they're using to be able to grow as educators. And, you know, we're looking forward to more collaboration between the grades. And the grade 8 stuff is going great. And, you know, we're really looking at how do we embed that into lower middle school at grades 5 and 6, and then ultimately into the elementary level. So we've definitely seen an increase in collaboration, an increase in teachers, you know, looking for inclusive texts, you know, making sure that their curriculum is represented with the students.
And from this point, we're going to ask Ms. Katie Walter to talk about her African American Studies class.
Hi, so I teach African American Studies, and this is a course that I guess redesigned prior to the 2020 school year. And I think as we heard acknowledged by some of the students from Lower Merion, it's, you know, it's certainly, it was a focus for me as a white woman teaching this course. We don't have an African American teacher in the social studies department. It was very important to me when designing this course to make sure that I received feedback from Black colleagues and coworkers, as well as other experts in this field. So you can see sort of what we examine in this course. We look at the historical and cultural experiences of African Americans. As was mentioned by Mr. Vaughn, I believe, we also thought it was really important to start not with the experience of the transatlantic slave trade, but to begin with the kingdoms of West Africa and the amazing civilizations and societies that existed before the transatlantic slave trade began. And then we moved through the experience of African American people in the United States all the way up to the modern time period. Emphasis is placed on looking at examples of Black excellence and resilience. And again, because I am a white teacher teaching this course, it's really important for me to make sure that I center Black voices. The district was extremely supportive in making that happen. So I worked with Black colleagues in the middle school and the high school in designing this course, and one of them recommended that I reach out to Dr. Amari Johnson, an assistant professor of African American Studies at Temple University. And the first semester that I taught this course, he worked with me every week. We met once a week, and he helped me to design the course and talk through what we were doing. He also guest lectures twice every semester and has also recommended multiple other guest speakers. So each semester there are at least 6 guest speakers, 1 per unit, which is something, again, the district has been very supportive of, setting aside the funds to make sure that that can happen, that we can have these guest lectures that come in. Additionally, in the course, it's really important for me to receive student feedback. So if you go on to the next slide, Horace, if you don't mind, you can see some of the units that we have laid out. The first semester that I taught this course, and every semester since that I've taught it, I've asked for student feedback at the beginning of the course, and then at the end of each unit, asking students what they've enjoyed and then also what they would still like to hear more about. And I've had several students, particularly my African American students, who have been extremely helpful in teaching me and giving me ideas about what to teach, recommending topics that they would like to hear about, things like intergenerational trauma, colorism in Hollywood, disparities in healthcare, environmental racism, topics that I might not have known about or thought about if it hadn't been for students recommending them. And then since students had recommended them, making sure that I include them in each semester since, and then also continue to keep the door open for students to recommend additional topics. One student this semester really wanted to make sure that there was a focus on the experiences of Black transgender women and the oppression that they are facing. So that's something that we were able to talk about, and I was able to find a lot of resources on for this semester. We also, in this course, again, trying to feature as many Black voices as possible. I rely pretty heavily on the documentaries that Dr. Henry Louis Gates from Harvard has created, as well as Dr. Clint Smith, and then also making sure you use excerpts from a lot of Black historians and authors, like Isabella Wilkerson, Carol Anderson, among others, and then also featuring podcasts by Black creators. So things like Code Switch or Still Processing, or things along those lines. I will also say, as a social studies teacher in general, I teach African American studies, but I also teach US history and US government. And teaching this course is amazing. I love it. But it has also really made me realize my shortcomings in terms of teaching US history and US government. And so much of what I've been able to use in this course, I have since also implemented in my US history course, because African American history is US history. And I've realized that, while I might have covered something like redlining in US history, I wasn't doing it justice. I wasn't giving students enough resources on it and spending quite enough time on it. Or similarly, like in a government course, there are many court cases that we weren't spending adequate time on. And so I'm hoping that will be something that I can continue to sort of push forward with through teaching this course. It's making my teaching better in other areas as well. And it's something that we're working on as a department. Very similar to some of the things that we heard from the Lower Merion students. That's something that we're hearing from students in our school as well, that we're not featuring their culture enough in our social studies courses. And so that's something that we're actively working on and redesigning our courses, and also trying to supplement our textbooks as well with outside additional sources. We don't have a student here with us today, but on the next several slides are some excerpts of feedback that I've gotten from students from this course. As you can see here, I took out the student's name, but this was feedback from a white student. And I think to speak to what Matt and Horace were talking about, we spent a lot of time the first couple of weeks in this course developing community and making sure that all students in the class are comfortable, sharing their thoughts and experiences. And this student was really impacted by something that one of her Black classmates shared with her. In a discussion that we were having.
Would you like me to go to the next slide?
Sure. This is a little bit blurry because it's a screenshot, but this student was just sharing that they loved the presentation by Dr. Amari Johnson and learning about their culture and roots, and also that others in the class are learning about why things are the way that they are. And that they believe this course and presentations from people like Dr. Amari Johnson should be shown to the whole school. It got the student thinking about why there's no written history for African culture. One of the guest lectures that Dr. Amari Johnson does is in that first unit where we talk about West African kingdoms and the African diaspora. And he comes in and does a lecture on African philosophy and that was, I think, really fascinating for some of our students who had never had the opportunity to hear about that before. And you can see this student was actually going to Temple, so he wanted to know more about what courses Dr. Amari Johnson taught so that he could perhaps take one. And again, this comment is from a student talking about the unit on Reconstruction and then the unit on the Jim Crow era, and talking about how it was only quickly summarized before. I would agree that that's sort of a shortcoming in some of our U.S. history courses, is that we don't spend as much time on it as we're able to spend in this course. And so that was really eye-opening for me as a teacher to get that feedback. And it's something that in my U.S. history course, I really tried to change this year.
And that concludes our presentation.
Thank you. Thank you for that presentation. Thank you, Laura Merion. I know that we've, went over some of the time constraints that we had, but I thought it was important that folks saw what is going on in the districts. And before we get to question, I would like to recognize Joanna Wexler, who's from Great Valley. Joanne has promised me she's going to be quick, but I thought it was important that she also, she's been doing a lot of work in TE, and she presented last year, but give a brief update, and then just to give you a little, before Joanna comes on, we're going to go into the questions that we can between now and 9:30. The questions that we have there, we will capture those questions if we don't finish, and we will send those to those districts and ask them to share out with us, and we'll share them out through Alex. So Joanna, thank you.
Sure. Thanks, Anthony. I'll be brief. I'm one of the assistant superintendents at Great Valley, and I oversee primarily some of our student services supports and personnel and policy. So I don't have a lot to say to update you tonight on the teaching and learning side, because I don't really directly supervise that as closely as some of the other administrators. But at some point, I'd love to share some updates there. But one of the couple things that have happened in the past few months is we have worked with our board to pass an equity policy, which is up for first reading this month with the hope of it being adopted in March. And I think that's just really important, at least for us in Great Valley, just because of the dissent in the community that has caused a lot of, for lack of a better term, I think pushback and controversy. So I think for us as the administration, we just feel it's really critical to have that policy in place because it's a board directed policy. So then our board is fully aware of what we've committed to and the work that we see that lies ahead. And kind of like what Laura Merion says, I do see that there's going to be more work with some administrative guidelines that associate with some of the big tenets of that policy to make it more actionable. But I think that was big for us in our district to move that forward. And I have to say, I'm happy that we've gotten to that point. And then we're still focusing on some of that higher level organizational work. So we just did a pretty robust climate assessment where we adopted a DEI module to look at how staff, families, and students perceive our work specifically related to DEI, inclusion and belonging. And then we're still seeking a consultant to do some organizational coaching with us and some really robust professional development with all teachers. While we're trying to make curricular changes, we feel that we need to do some more work with our teaching staff in the professional development arena. Like, we're doing it in pockets, but we committed as a group last year to really get more of like a baseline uniform training that would really help to get the staff in the uniform place, which I know is challenging, but we feel that that's probably necessary at this point. So we were looking at a few different consultants and we're still vetting a few. So those are some of the big things that are happening for us at the moment, but I really appreciate hearing all the curricular lens, and especially from the students. It gives ideas and it gives me a lot of pause for areas of improvement for us. So thank you for sharing. I appreciate it. Go Abington. Abington's in the house. I'm an Abington parent. So thank you, Chris.
Right. Chris, speaking of Chris is going to transition to Dr. Brown, who is going to facilitate the questions both through chat and otherwise. So I'll turn it over to Dr. Brown.
All right. I'm going to try to incorporate as much of these questions as I can, and I'll try to frame them a little bit so that each of the districts has a chance to participate. So, there were a couple of comments in the chat specific to some individual situations with, students and experiences at school. So the way I'll phrase this question is, we've heard from Lower Merion, TE, Great Valley briefly, even myself, about some of the things that are happening in our school spaces. So the question is, knowing that, as districts, you're trying to lead positive work. Okay, I think that's what you shared with some of the courses, the social justice standards. And we know that there are students who walk out of our school spaces who don't feel like they belong. So we know that there's and both of those statements are true. So the question is, as a district, like what are you prepared to do to kind of bridge that perception gap? I guess that's probably a good way to say, because we know that these are the things you're trying to do, but we also know that these are some of the experiences that students are having. So how do we try to connect the two? So that we'll leave it open for any of the districts to jump in to start.
So, I'm happy to talk a little bit in that it's difficult, right? I mean, I think we have a lot of district-wide groups, and we even have cultural proficiency groups in every one of our buildings. We do staff development that's mandatory for staff. Mind you, probably could do more than we do, but we definitely do mandatory staff development, and we ask our teachers to take risks. When Dr. Gaudioso was talking about our CP for Kids lessons, every single teacher teaches those lessons. And so we train the teachers on how to teach the lessons. We have them practice the lessons. Then we do feedback loops off the back of them, which is the same process that we use at the secondary level, but it's stepping out. There's no doubt about that. And so it's continuing to try to listen and try to grow. We're going to have a forum in our district next week. That's an open forum for our parents to come and chat with us and talk to us, but it's definitely a work in progress, and it's not an easy answer that I could give you, but I think that we keep trying to make sure that we're bridging that piece. And I know that we have room to grow. I think we all acknowledge that, but it is definitely a work in progress. And we do want our teachers to step out. So you saw the curriculum work that we're doing. It's hard sometimes to teach that curriculum, and especially when there's not a comfort level. And I've heard a couple of people say that today. So we are trying to make sure to the best of our ability that it's happening. We're in classrooms, we're watching, we're observing, but we have room to grow, and we'll continue to try to connect the two in our district.
I just would echo some of those, same themes. I think one of the most important things that we need to do when we're thinking about implementing this curriculum, you just mentioned, and also, Matt and Horace spoke to it in our district, and that is building that comfort level among the teachers to facilitate conversations among the students, and also creating that classroom community where students feel safe enough to explore multiple perspectives and to speak their truth within the classroom. So I think it's just an ongoing process as well. I guess the other thing that is on my mind right now, mainly because I was with a group of student advisors today, is really listening to the students and soliciting that feedback from them. And I think that, speaking on a personal level, when I hear the students speak, to me, that's the most impactful thing. And so I try to go into those conversations being very open and with an eye towards, or with an ear towards listening, and really taking to heart what the students are saying. And that's something that I know a lot of our teachers have really been focused on as we've been going through some of these curricular revisions. Katie gave some good examples of some of the feedback that she's collecting, not just at the end of the year, but after each unit. And how can, what else do you want to learn about? What was missing? What was your experience in this class? So I think that's really an important part of this as well.
Thank you both. No, I think there's tremendous value in just communicating in forums like this, as far as sharing the things that you're doing so that, families within the communities can connect between, the books that are being read, the courses that are out there, and why you're doing it. So this is a fantastic, fantastic forum, for those purposes. Transitioning a little bit, when you just mentioned feedback from students, and one of the points that came up was asking about, data and asking about evaluating whether or not we can use the social justice standards or many of the things that you talked about are having the desired effect. I know, Katie, you shared a few examples of that with some of the feedback from your courses, but whether this be with the social justice standards or any of the initiatives that you mentioned, can you describe your process of kind of evaluating, is this working?
So if I can at least just get some of the process started to the point that Wendy just made, basically it's really just about talking to the kids. Of course there's surveys, right? Tons of surveys, but actually being able to speak with different groups, speak with students in the African American Student Union, being able to speak to students in the Asian American Culture Club. We recently have been able to form at the high school a group called the Equity Leadership Alliance, where a number of the different cultural clubs get together and have representatives to speak about what are common issues that they have, amongst their groups. And so getting administrators and teachers to be able to talk to those groups. We have equity teams in each building. And so recently we had a number of the students of these groups come into, the equity team meeting and share out, what are some of the concerns? What are some of the thoughts at ground level? And we were able to hear some of their experiences that they have been having with teachers. We have diversity committee meetings where we're able to talk with parents and actually have students speak to groups and speak to parents, and everyone gets to share out, so that, even while we're putting all of these ideas together and trying to change, curriculum and trying to change units, that we're addressing, when a kid gets called a racial slur, that we're addressing when they get called, something that's highly offensive, when they don't feel safe and when they feel threatened. So that it's like, while we're still, trying to maintain these systems of support, that we're also listening to their stories and making sure we're addressing them, even as we're trying to make these wholesale changes within our systems and within our districts. So that's, just really talking to them is really one of the ways that we've really trying to get their experiences. I don't know if anybody else wants to build on that.
So I'd like to jump in if nobody else is here. So I'm a parent. I've got 2 children in the Great Valley School District. I am in 7th and 9th grade. I'm the mother who put in the chat that my oldest daughter in, I guess she was in 5th grade, was called the N-word in the library. And the school principal at the time reduced it to just a he said, she said. And if it weren't for the fact that my husband and I told her to have each of my kids has a safe adult at the school, she asked to go to the bathroom and ran to that teacher, and that teacher called me. If it weren't for the fact that my daughter was crying, me and my husband would never know that someone called her a nigger. And I'm saying that because if my fifth grader had to hear that word, I think all these adults need to hear it as well too. So that's number one. Because that was mishandled, all of their experiences from then have been looked at very differently. So I just wanted to put that out there. But the one thing I keep hearing, everyone's talking about, we need to do curriculum revisions. We need to do this, but we got to make sure the teachers are comfortable to teach it. We got to make sure the teachers, What about these children of color? They don't have the luxury of waiting until they're comfortable learning about things in a non-Black environment before they go to school. So I guess I challenge you, because if these teachers are able to, or if you teachers are able to teach children about some very horrific events that have happened to non-Black people with relative ease, why can't you teach about Black history? There's a lot of positive, there's a lot of negative. I grew up in an area, I'm from Pittsburgh originally. I grew up in an area that was predominantly Jewish. So even though I'm a Black female, minority growing up, I was a Gentile. That's what made me kind of a marginalized student, so to speak. I learned from kindergarten on about the Holocaust. I met people's grandparents. I've seen tattoos from the camps right up close and personal. And it was taught in such a way where no one was embarrassed. No one really was sad. You almost felt empowered after the lesson because at the end of the day, it was kind of a never again, this won't happen again kind of a tone. So I challenge you guys to really revisit the notion that your teachers who are highly educated in these fantastic school districts, they actually have the ability to talk to children about pretty much anything. And that's all I'm going to say.
I think that's a great point as far as the teachers and their ability. And I'll also share, I know we heard from both Lower Merion and TE about the use of the social justice standards. And, I think we heard some small examples, but that's a framework that, for the educators in the classrooms to use to bring in to intentionally bring in identity, to intentionally bring in diversity, to intentionally bring in action, to intentionally bring in justice in all lenses of, whatever the topic may be. And I think that's a language, that's a skill set that, is brought in, it's fused in the lesson plans. And I think that's a mechanism. And I know we talked about like comfort, that's a mechanism to help teachers connect intentionally with what they're trying to do in terms of engaging in conversations. I think, and without seeing information, I know I could probably assume that, there are folks in both Lower Merion and TE who have been teaching for quite some time. And, you're right, they have the ability to do these things. And I think with the focus on professional development, like it's going to continue to become easier for them to do that, easier for them to do that authentically as well. And that's the piece I think Wendy mentioned, encouraging teachers to take risks. It's stepping out of their comfort zone because it's not something that perhaps they've been accustomed to doing. And with that also comes, high risk, high reward, but there's also the ability then for, missteps. And I think that's part of the process. So, I think the work is happening in these school districts as I've heard it. And I think, we're never going to move at a pace that I think is going to get us exactly where we need to be instantly. But I do think, I think they're both moving in a good direction. I think our school districts as well, because I'm not saying this from a position of we've arrived either. So, it's a point of emphasis that I think that instrument, the social justice standards, I don't know that we spend enough time talking about those, really give teachers a framework to be able to do that in the classroom, age appropriate, so I think that's a phenomenal resource in both of those districts. Thank you for the question. Looks like doing good on time. But the next question on the list was, are you getting pushback from families and or community members? And I'll add a piece. If you're getting pushback from families and community members, how do you respond?
I was going to say, do you want me? I can jump in a little bit on that.
Yeah, maybe talk.
The CP for kids.
Yeah, CP for kids. I would say in our district, we're very fortunate because in the broad sense, I don't feel like we get pushback from our families about the work that we're doing. In fact, I think we're pushed to do more work in this area, and that's something that you don't find in many districts. And so I feel like we're fortunate because we have families that really advocate for us to do this work. But Jen, maybe you could talk about CP for kids because that's a great example.
Yeah, so we were really intentional with the lessons. I mean, I agree with you, Chris, the social justice standards, I think really were just a great resource for us because they are so student friendly and developmentally matched. We send out something to parents in advance of the lesson. And really our intention there was just to include parents and families in the conversation so that they know what their kids are going to be talking about. They know the learning targets. And if they want to follow up and engage at home, they have that opportunity. So we send it out in advance. We have the lessons and then we send out a follow-up with, and here's here was the book and here are the talking points or some talking points. So, we've had tremendous support. And I think at the time that there was a lot of ramping up in the news about critical race theory in schools, we did get a few questions, more than we had, in our first year doing it. But what our assistant principals, I will say, have been fabulous. They're on the district CP team engaging in the lessons, and they make it personal. They give a call and just, can I answer any questions, and maybe share some of the book in advance. And the parents overall have just been really, really amazingly supportive. I think once in a while you get somebody who has a concern and might want, I'm thinking of an example, as a family who felt like, we have a way that we teach this at home and we would prefer our way to your way, but it was still, aligned with the mission of the work, which, I think it's still really largely supportive.
So I'll speak a little bit about TE. I mean, we certainly do have a lot of families in our district who are very supportive of this work, and we have some too who have expressed concerns about some of the racial equity work. And I think it goes back to a couple of things that have been mentioned already tonight. Number one, we have a tremendously supportive school board that works with us and believes that this is very important work. And to that end, we developed, and maybe it's already been presented to this group, I'm not sure, but we developed an equity statement and then principles to accompany that statement, similar, I think, to what I heard from others talking about a policy, and really outlined very specifically what we're hoping to achieve, what we stand for as a district, and what that could look like. And so we can, we have encouraged our teachers, if they receive questions about some of the things that are happening, some of the changes in the curriculum or the instructional practices, that they can fall back on these principles and say, well, here's why I'm doing this. The other thing that's been helpful is looking at this through the lens of critical thinking and critical inquiry. And that's what we've been doing for a long time with our students, is trying to engender those skills that will help them to be good thinkers. And one of the ways to do that is to look at things from a wide variety of perspectives and consider experiences that are different than your own. And then finally, I think it just comes down to what we've been saying, and it's the relationship building. I think all of us, from my district at least, who are here tonight, have had one-on-one conversations with families, with students, and really talked about, what are your concerns or what are your questions? How can we support you? And I think that's oftentimes the most effective.
Thank you. I saw a couple of, Anthony, before you close, I wanted to revisit one statement real quick, because I saw the conversation emerging, which was, the piece about stepping out of comfort zones. To give a little bit of an anecdote about unpacking that a little bit. So an example I can think of, I remember being a second year world history teacher, and within my class, we were responsible for teaching about religions. And I've had an honors class. It was my second year. It was the first honors class I had. And we had to teach about Judaism. And I had students in the classroom who were Jewish. And me, I had no idea about anything connected to Judaism. So walking into that class, and I remember it was 7th period, like when the lessons would come up, like I would be on pins and needles thinking, I'm going to say the wrong thing. I'm going to, I'm going to embarrass myself. I'm going to be wrong. These kids know more than I do. Like that was the feeling, and not necessarily stepping out of comfort zones, but it has the ability in that circumstance to impact how I thought, how I processed, to the point where I think I minimized my ability to actually teach because I wasn't sure of myself. Now, we didn't have the professional development then that we have now. And I think that's part of what the tools like the social justice standards and with the increased focus, like that's what that can help with. Because I think when you don't have that experience, when you don't have that connection, and this was something Katie had mentioned when she talked about her class, all of the preparation that went into that, you know, if I'm not, as a teacher, and I'm using myself here because I don't want to speak for others, but if I'm not prepared to enter into that space, like I think sometimes that's when you get those circumstances, and not to say comfort, but it's a lack of preparedness. So it's the district's responsibility really to increase the preparedness of their teachers. And I think that's part of what these districts, part of what our district is trying to do in terms of helping make that not get that feeling. Because for some, that when that fight or flight kicks in, it's like flight right away. You know, they'll run from that conversation. Whereas if you're prepared for it, you're more ready to actually handle it. So I think that's part of what the focus on professional development is for, and where that urgency comes in. So I wanted to close that thought before we left. And now I'll turn it over to Dr. Stevenson.
Yes, thanks, Dr. Brown. First of all, I want to, before I turn it over to Alex, thank everyone for coming, particularly LM and TE. There's a diversity of feedback that we've gotten in questions, and what we're going to collect those through the NAACP will collect these. Part of the recording, we can share them out with the districts, and the districts can give us feedback they can share out through Alex's eServe list. I just want to say thank you again for being here tonight. This is important work. It's a work that needs to continue, and I can't thank the NAACP of Mainline to continuously push us as school officials to bring this information to the table and be a part of that conversation. So with that, Alex, I'll turn it over to you. So Alex has been having some audio issues. So so I will say on behalf of Alex, thank you all for coming here tonight, and I wish you the best. And Mimi, go to bed. It's too late. All right. Take care, everybody.
Before you all leave, I want you to please take a look in the chat. Here is our link to become a member of our NAACP branch. Please join us. Thank you, everyone.